My quote today comes out of one of my own magazines. It's issue number 9, and it's about imagination. Where will your imagination take you? So I decided to do a quote out of here, and it's one of my own quotes. Our success or failure start in our imagination. And I also have this fun 2 pages here that are just loads of quotes about imagination and the impact they have on us. This whole magazine was really impactful. I talk about dreams, visions, imagination, what's the difference. I talk about Yetzer, the Hebrew word that is translated imagination. And I talked about that yesterday in my video. So when I talked about the potter, so here's a picture of a potter and my article on Yetzer. And so if you want a copy of this, it's really fantastic issue, of course. Then I'll put a link to that in the description. But I really did want to talk about and share about our success or failure really does depend on our imagination. And that is something that I really learned in putting this magazine together. So each edition is a completely different theme. And what I do is I do these deep dives. I read books and articles and watch videos. And I do months of research before I before I actually start writing and designing the theme. Right now, I'm researching on the soul. I think I've mentioned that in some of my previous unveiled episodes. And so the magazine, and then when I design the magazine, it ends up being birthed out of the lessons that I learned from reading all the books, and I look up Bible verses. I spend time in prayer. I watch videos. I just want to see what other people are thinking or saying on about a certain topic. And then I like to go back and research, way back when, especially ancient Hebrew. I think that's my favorite, and I probably will continue that theme of researching what the ancient Hebrews understood about that topic. And I do that because I personally believe that's like the original language. I believe that's the language God gave them. And I believe it's a language that is so full and deep of meaning that you could spend your whole life unpacking it. And that's what rabbis do. They just really study the Hebrew language. And so I go back and I study, what does that theme mean? Like, what did imagination mean to the ancient Hebrews? What did they understand about it? What was God trying to teach them about it? And then but then I go to other sources as well and say, well, what do they have to say about imagination? And like when I was doing imagination, I really leaned heavily on a book by a poet, Malcolm Guite. He wrote a book called Imagination in the Kingdom of God. Fantastic book. Maybe I'll read a quote out of that next time. And I got other books by other people as well. I don't remember which ones, because that one in particular really stood out. There was a book by Andrew Womack called The Power of Imagination, and that one really stood out. And it made me think about what I really do with my imagination, and especially that idea of Yetzer and what I talked about yesterday of how we form our imagination. And so I was, ironically, after I filmed that yesterday, I was presented with an opportunity to check my imagination. My imagination started to run in a negative direction in regards to a situation I was faced with. And I'm a daydreamer. I got in trouble by my first grade teacher, Mrs. Straw. She was this beautiful African-American teacher, and I don't remember a whole lot about it other than she was very sweet, but she was also really strict. And I just remember getting in trouble multiple times because I was a daydreamer. And I think there's this beauty that, or, we, as we grow, we lose touch with that ability to daydream, with that ability to imagine the possibilities of what our day could be. And I think just as our human nature, and especially as we grow into adults, we start becoming cynical about life because life hurts. The older you get, the more you realize life really hurts, and life is unfair because you're now faced with not only the consequences of your choices, you're awakening to the consequences of the choices of others, and you can't control others, and you want to control others, but you're faced with their consequences. And so then we get hardened and we get cynical, and instead of these vibrant imaginations, our imaginations turn inward, or they turn negative, and we start imagining the worst. At least that's what I have a tendency to do. My imagination runs wild. So something happens that I don't want to happen, or a decision is made that I'm like, I don't want that decision to be made. And then I start thinking, well, then this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and it's going to be terrible. And then I just get wrapped up in this ball of self-pity, and, I'll turn off all the lights and go sit in the corner and cry for myself. And, it sounds silly, but, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that does this. And I don't do it every day, but I do. And that's my imagination, my negative yetzer, and what the Bible calls evil imaginations. That's what that is. Will take hold, and it'll just run. I mean, it like takes off to the races. And, the next thing I know, my life is horrible and miserable, and over something really silly. But that's the power of imagination. And last night, I really learned this powerful lesson, when I was just really coming before God and asking Him, help me with my imagination. I know my imagination is wrong, and I know my imagination is influencing the situation, and I want to turn it around. And one of the things that He taught me was, I have become very good at, even though I might be in a situation or around people that I don't like the person, or I don't like the situation, or I have resentment built up in my heart, or just there is a negative emotion attached to either a person or a situation. And knowing that that is negative and probably not appropriate, then I've learned to put on a veil of the words and actions that I know I'm supposed to have. And while that is honoring, when we walk into a situation and you're like, I hate this person, but I'm going to treat them with kindness. That's an act of love. That's an act of self-control. And yes, even though it's a bit of pretense, it is because you're veiling your true feelings. I do this. I veil my true feelings, and I act with kindness, and I try to be as sincere as I can, and I avoid flattery, but I try to do as the best I can with a genuine kindness. But God really talked to me last night, and He was like, look, yes, it's good that you veil yourself with what loving and kind actions should be in words, even though it's opposite of how you feel. But true love, true kindness, and true, what we like to call authenticity or genuineness, comes when you allow your imagination, when you allow me to come into your imagination. And it's that same word that says, getting the mind of Christ. That word is imagination, getting the imagination of Christ, which is the imagination of the Father. And when we do that, then it's our heart that is transformed. And then we're able to be kind. And I think we all are able to pick up on this when we're around people. I think we can kind of tell, oh, they're treating us kindly, but something's just not quite there. And it's probably because they're doing their best to be kind even though there is resentment or anger in their heart towards you, and vice versa, that we have towards them. But it's even better. It's agape love. When we can come into a situation, we don't particularly enjoy that person. We don't agree with the situation or circumstances surrounding it, but we've been able to tap into the imagination, that mind of Christ, so that when we interact with them, there can be this true genuineness of kindness and love, rather than a veiled one. And I'm not saying the veiled one is bad. That shows self-control. As long as your motives isn't, I'm here to manipulate the situation. There's that too. And we never talk about that, hardly ever. But there are situations where people come in, they can't stand you, they can't stand the situation, but they show kindness because they want to manipulate it and flatter, or there's this, or they have an attitude of disdain, and you can taste it. Even though they say the right words, you can taste their disdain. Then that's one level. Then you have the level where most of us, I think, reside, where we don't like that person. We don't like the situation. We're going to do our best to be kind because we want to do what's right in spite of how we feel. And so that is a measure of love and self-control. And if that's where you're at, then be there and be kind and use your self-control. But then there is a maturity. Then there is a level of living where we can invite Christ into our mind, into our imagination, to transform not just our actions, not just the surface level of our actions, but transform our heart, where we can operate in genuine love and kindness within a situation or towards a person. Doesn't mean we still like them, but we can still have this love and kindness that comes from a genuine heart of love and kindness because we've altered our imagination about the situation. And so that's what I wanted to share today, because that's what God taught me last night. So that's what I'm working on for me personally, is not to, okay, how am I going to get through this situation? How am I going to suck it up in this situation and not let it, because what happens is in those situations, if they're left unattended or they're intense or whatever, it will end up eating away at us, even though we put on the right face and the right attitude. But then it eats away at us because our imaginations, then our resentment grows and our disdain grows and our, I can't think of all the other words, but all of the negativeness grows within us. And I want to get to the point where I'm like, I can't control people. I can't control situations. Yes, I can be kind, but I want to be kind from the heart, and not just out of self-control. I want to take it to the next level. I want to operate out of agape love, where my heart is transformed, where I can genuinely release these people and the situations, whatever they are, and just go, you know what? I release it. I can genuinely release it. I can genuinely be happy for this person. I can genuinely be content and joyful and peaceful. I think that's the other word. Do I have my Peace magazine here? I still don't have my Peace magazine over here. Here's Be Still. That peace, that shalom where you step into the situation and chaos flees. I can do that because I've set up my imaginings. I've set up my yetzer, my imagination, and I've captured it. And I'm thinking about the blessings in the situation. I'm thinking about how much God loves that person. I'm thinking about situations where the shoe is on the other foot, where I may not like this situation, but is there a time in my life where I've been on the other side of the fence in this situation, and I've put people in uncomfortable situations, or I've created an atmosphere where other people are uncomfortable, and how and trying to figure out how I made them feel and what was I thinking at that time. And so it's just that putting ourselves in other people's shoes, having that compassion, still being able to disagree and say, this isn't right, but I'm going to genuinely love you in this situation. I am going to genuinely change what I imagine about this situation. I'm going to imagine myself, in their shoes when maybe it's a maturity issue. Maybe I was a lot younger and I did the exact same thing. And I'm trying to imagine, what was I thinking through? I was doing the best I could in that moment. And so now I have compassion. I can say, you know what? That person is doing the best they can do in this moment. And in a few years, they're going to mature, and I'm going to pray for that maturity. I'm going to pray that they're going to be able to make different decisions, or whatever it is, that just being able to change, and that does change the trajectory of our life. It takes us from being miserable. It opens up opportunities, because now our eyes have, when we have wrong imaginations, we become laser focused on the negative. And so when we can take that off and we can look at the situation and have our hearts transformed, we can now see other things around us. Doors for deeper relationships might open up. Doors for, we don't know who's watching us. Maybe they're watching us in the situation, and maybe they know that it's a difficult situation we're in, but they can see and they can tell. People can tell when the way you're acting is authentic or and genuine or not. And I think other people can say, wow, I know how hard that was for her, and I could see how genuine her kindness was towards that person, even though it was really hard. And I want to know more about that. And you don't know who you're going to influence. So anyway, just sharing my personal, wow, this is really long. Just sharing my personal walk in learning how to change my imagination so that I can transform my life. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you tomorrow.